My name's John Graham, and I'm the badass granddad you didn't know you had. I'm here to tell you another story of my adventures, this one about the power of shock. And I'll also offer some tips on taking risks and living a life with meaning, courage, and passion. Anyway, this story starts in Cambodia, and I'm there to help negotiate a ceasefire between the government of Cambodia and the Khmer Rouge, a bunch of fanatic rebels who had actually run the country into the ground for 4 years, killing 1 million people, but now they'd been forced to hideouts in the country's northeast, but still they were able to conduct hit-and-run raids that were upsetting the peace in the country. So the government really wanted a ceasefire, and it was ready to offer them partial amnesty if the Khmer Rouge would lay down their arms, and that was the proposal I brought. So I go to the appointed place, and the Khmer Rouge guy walks in. He's got a fancy French suit. He's shined his shoes a lot better than I had mine, and he immediately launches into a propaganda diatribe. Khmer Rouge were all right. They never killed anyone. The government was the bad guys, etc., etc. Well, I hadn't come halfway around the world to listen to this BS. So I interrupted him. I said, hey, what about your family? He looks at me, annoyed, because I interrupted him. He said, my family, they're in a village not too far from here, and even now it's being bombed by government warplanes. I said, well, you must be worried about them. He said, yes, of course I'm worried about my family. So we talked a bit more about his family, and I ended up asking him how he happened to join the Khmer Rouge. So he says, well, I went over there as a volunteer to help the North Vietnamese fight you imperialists in the war in Vietnam. I says, well, when was that? He says, well, it was 71 and 72. I says, where? And he said, I was involved in the battle for Hue in the northern part of what you call South Vietnam. And I looked at him and I says, well, that's very interesting, because I was in Hue in 71, 72, fighting to defend it against people like you. So he looks at me with a slight smile on his face, and he says, well, Mr. Graham, perhaps we've met before. And I stuck out my hand to him, and I said, yeah. I said, over gun sights. So anyway, that really broke the momentum of his propaganda, and we actually began to talk seriously about the proposal I had brought. And sure enough, in a couple of months, there was a ceasefire, and it saved a whole bunch of lives. So the negotiation eventually worked. Now, my point is this. If you're in a negotiation, maybe it's domestic, maybe it's your company, and the other side is implacable, and you can't get a word in edgewise, try the power of shock and make it very, very personal, the same way I asked this guy about his family. I mean, if a negotiation is going very poorly, you got nothing to lose, right?